Hey guys, tonight we journey into the heart of ancient Rome, not to watch triumphs or golden parades, but to slip quietly into a world of shadows. The streets may be filled with marble and torchlight, but beneath all that grandeur lies something much stranger. Punishment so theatrical you'd think the Senate hired playwrights instead of judges. You're about to walk with me into rituals where religion and law collide, and where one wrong move means you'll never see the sky again. You probably won't survive this, but at least you'll learn something before the soil closes over you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how many time zones share this little campfire. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward in sandals that scrape against polished stone, entering the courtyard of the House of the Vestals. This isn't just another Roman building, it's the beating heart of the city's sacred life. The air smells of incense and hot wax. Behind you, the forum buzzes with gossip, but in here, silence reigns. 6 women, chosen as little girls before their first birthdays, had stacked up to a dozen, live their entire youth in white robes. They are the Vestal virgins, guardians of the eternal flame of Vesta, the goddess who warms Rome's hearth and symbolically Rome's survival itself. If that fire ever went out, the empire feared chaos. Think of them like ancient Rome's Wi-Fi router. If it crashed, everyone panicked. You might think it's a cushy role. After all, the Vestals get prime seats at gladiator games, travel around in covered carriages, and command respect so intense that even the toughest centurion would step aside. They could even pardon a prisoner with just one word. Pretty good perks package, right? But here's the line in the contract, written in letters as sharp as daggers. Absolute chastity. For 30 years, not a glance, not a whisper, not a single romantic accident. Historians still argue whether this vow was about spiritual purity, political control, or just a clever way for men in power to keep important women locked away. Whatever the reason, breaking it brought a punishment colder than any sword. Because spilling a Vestal's blood was considered sacrilege, the Romans invented something different. If one of these women strayed, she wouldn't be dragged to a gallows or struck with a blade. No, her fate was the earth itself. Picture the ceremony. You are led veiled through the hushed streets at dusk. Crowds gather but dare not shout. This is too solemn, too eerie. Officials walk ahead, carrying tools, spades, torches, an oil lamp flickering in its bronze dish. At the edge of the city, a small pit waits. It's not deep enough to be called a tomb, not wide enough to be a chamber. It's simply a hole big enough to hold one life and snuff it quietly. The Romans, practical as ever, supply the basics: a loaf of bread, a jug of water, a jar of oil, and that lonely lamp. Why? Because even in punishment, ritual mattered. By leaving a trace of food and flame, the executioners could claim they hadn't murdered the Vestal outright. They had simply relocated her. What happened afterward was between her and the gods. It's a bureaucratic loophole, So Roman, you can practically hear the Senate clerks scribbling exemptions in triplicate. You are lowered down. The rope creaks. Your sandals touch the packed earth at the bottom. For a moment your eyes adjust and the lamp's glow gives the chamber an almost warm hue. But then the lid slides back into place. The last shaft of daylight shrinks to nothing. The air thickens. Above men, shovel soil sealing you in as casually as if they were closing a warehouse door. Rome does not spill your blood, but Rome does not hesitate to bury you alive. The man who shared your secret, he doesn't get such ceremony. His punishment is far quicker public scourging until his body gives way. Brutal, yes, but at least the torment doesn't drag on for hours. You, on the other hand, are left to reckon with the silence, the flicker of your oil lamp, the knowledge that the entire city has already moved on. Here's the quirky tidbit: some accounts mention that Rome sometimes reused the same burial site, layering shame upon shame like a grim lasagna. Each Vestal condemned joined a ghostly sorority beneath the earth. Historians still argue whether this detail is exaggeration or not. But the idea alone is enough to make you glance nervously at the floorboards. And yet, despite this horror, many families fought to have their daughters chosen as Vestals. The honor outweighed the risk, much as people today sign up for jobs that come with prestige, but also stress enough to chew through your sanity. In Rome, to be a Vestal meant your name would echo through centuries unless you made one slip. Now pause and imagine the psychology. 30 years of watching every word, every glance, every step. You live among marble courtyards, but under a microscope sharper than any paparazzi lens. And you know the penalty. Unlike other Romans, you don't even get the dignity of bloodshed. Your punishment is to vanish silently beneath the city that once revered you. This is where the bedtime tone softens. You lie in that imagined pit, the oil lamp casting trembling shadows. You think about the flame you kept burning in Vesta's temple, a flame mirrored now by this tiny spark in your prison. You wonder if the goddess sees you, if the people above remember your name, or if by morning you'll simply be one more whisper in the forum's gossip. And here's a gentle reality check for you as listener. Next time your boss asks you to work late, remember, at least you're not bound by a 3-decade vow of chastity, backed up by a live burial clause. History offers perspective, sometimes harsh, sometimes absurd. The last sound you hear is not the shuffle of guards or the cry of spectators. It's the faint hiss of earth settling overhead, muffling the outside world. In that darkness, Rome declares the account balanced, no blood spilled, no gods angered, no loose ends except yours. The Vestals continued for centuries, their temple standing proud until Christianity rose and the eternal flame was finally extinguished. Some scholars still argue whether the strictness was superstition, political theater, or just Rome's way of dramatizing control. Whatever the reason, the buried Vestals remain one of the starkest reminders that even in a society famed for law and engineering, mercy was not always part of the design. You wake to the sound of chains. Iron cuffs clink against your wrists, and the smell of wet leather creeps into your nose. This isn't just another Roman punishment. Tonight, you're part of a performance half ritual, half nightmare. The Romans had a gift for staging cruelty, as if it were theatre and you, unlucky soul, have landed the starring role. Your crime parricide, killing your own father or mother. Few offences made Roman society shiver quite like this. Rome was obsessed with family order. The household wasn't just private space, but the miniature engine of the state. The father, the pater familias, wasn't merely dad. He was judge, jury, and executioner within his home. He could disown you, sell you, even put you to death. And if you dared flip that script, if you struck at the man whose shadow stretched over the whole household, you didn't just break a family rule. You fractured the very foundation of Roman order. So the state had to make an example. And what an example they chose. You're dragged into the forum. Your hands bound your tunic already torn to shame you. Crowds circle murmuring. Unlike a beheading or a crucifixion, this punishment isn't efficient. It's symbolic, poetic in its own twisted way. The magistrates read out the sentence, you will suffer the poena coulae, the penalty of the sack. The name sounds harmless, almost rustic, as if you were about to be bundled like grain. But the Romans never did anything halfway. First comes the parade of animals. Servants drag them forward, a rooster flapping angrily, a snarling dog straining at its leash, a slithering serpent coiled in a basket, and a squealing pig tied at the legs. Sometimes accounts swap the lineup, a monkey instead of the rooster, a viper instead of a general snake, but the principle is the same. Each beast represents something symbolic, betrayal, madness, filth, or simple chaos. Together, they form the twisted family you are now condemned to join. You shiver not from cold, but from the surreal horror of it. People lean forward, eyes wide. Rome thrived on spectacle and nothing satisfied, like watching punishment turn into theatre. The leather sack waits. It's massive, stitched from thick cowhide, smelling of sweat, blood, and years of use. This isn't the first time the cullius has been unfurled, and it won't be the last. Officials shove you forward, your knees buckle, and the crowd roars not in pity, but in morbid anticipation. One by one, the animals are forced in. The dog snarls, snapping blindly at whatever touches it. The rooster thrashes, feathers flying. The pig squeals so high-pitched, it rattles your skull. Finally, the basket tips and the serpent slides across the floor scales, whispering like dry leaves. The crowd pulls back instinctively, but the guards push it into the sack with long sticks. The snake coils, tongue flickering, searching for warmth or perhaps for vengeance. Then it's your turn. You're shoved into the dark leather chamber, pressed against bristling fur and feather, against hot flesh and coiling scales. The sack closes. A cord tightens at the top. Outside, the last face you see is a magistrate's expressionless mask. Inside, the darkness is total. Now comes the part the Romans loved, the chaos. The animals thrash, clawbite, and wriggle in panic. The sack jerks and bucks like a living thing. Imagine being trapped with teeth, snapping at your skin claws, raking your arms, the serpent winding its way across your legs. There's no space to escape, no air to breathe properly. Each moment stretches into eternity. And this is only the opening act. Because the Romans don't just tie the sack shut. They load it onto a cart and wheel it out of the forum, the crowd following in grim fascination. The Cullius rocks and heaves your muffled screams, mixing with animal shrieks. Some spectators laugh, others whisper prayers, and children peek between their parents' robes, terrified but unable to look away. At the river's edge, the finale waits. The sack, heavy and writhing, is hoisted onto a boat or dragged straight into the water. The idea is simple. The family murderer does not deserve burial in Roman soil. You are to vanish, not honored, not remembered, not even given a gravestone. Instead, you and your new family of beasts are cast into the Tiber, sealed together, until silence swallows the struggle. It's theatre morality play and public warning rolled into one. Let's pause a moment. Imagine the psychology again. The Romans could have killed you in a dozen simple ways: beheading, crucifixion, strangulation. But the sack was about more than death. It was about narrative. Rome believed crime had to be answered with symbolism. Parricide wasn't just murder, it was the reversal of nature, so your punishment had to mirror that chaos. By sealing you with beasts, the Romans stripped you of your humanity. You were no longer a citizen, no longer a person, but a creature among creatures, devouring and being devoured. By tossing you into the river, they denied you the earth, the funeral rites, the family tomb, all the things a Roman valued most. It was annihilation of identity, not just body. And yet historians debate how often was this penalty actually carried out. Some argue it was more theoretical, a legendary punishment used sparingly. Others suggest Rome loved the theatre too much to let it stay rare. What we know for sure is that the Poena Culae became famous far beyond its actual practice, haunting Roman imagination like a bedtime story gone horribly wrong. So, as you listen, drifting toward sleep, picture that sack rocking on the river, slipping slowly beneath the surface. The crowd disperses, muttering, satisfied that order has been restored. The magistrates return to their scrolls, the animals vanish into silence, and Rome breathes again. But the story lingers, because what terrifies us most is not simply death, but death wrapped in ritual, in meaning, in theatre that makes you wonder, what would they have done to me? As your eyelids grow heavy, remind yourself your pillow is soft, your room quiet, and the only animals near you are the ones on your blanket pattern or curled on your rug. Rome's punishments may feel far away, but they still echo, reminding us that civilization has always had a flair for cruelty dressed in ceremony. And with that, the sack sinks, the river closes, and Section 2 drifts into silence. The court is silent, and you know what's coming before the magistrate opens his mouth. Death alone would be merciful, but the Romans rarely settled for mercy. You hear the word whispered like a curse, a word so infamous that even the crowd flinches: crucifixio. Crucifixion wasn't just punishment, it was humiliation, weaponized. To Romans, it was the ultimate penalty, reserved for the lowest rebellious slaves, bandits, foreigners, and traitors, citizens of standing never. The very idea of a respectable Roman nailed to wood was obscene. Cicero once declared it the most cruel and disgusting penalty, unworthy of the word Roman. Which is why you condemned, stripped of status, are about to discover what it meant to lose not just your life, but your dignity. The guards strip your tunic away. Public shame is part of the sentence. Your body isn't yours anymore, it's a prop in Rome's performance of power. A heavy beam, the patibulum, is laid across your shoulders. Rough wood digs into your skin, and before long your sweat stains it dark. The upright pole, the stipeps, already waits outside the city. You'll meet it soon enough. You stumble forward carrying your own stage of execution. The crowd follows jeering, throwing pebbles, some silent with pity, others loud with laughter. Crucifixion was not private. It was deliberately slow, deliberately public. Rome wanted every passer-by to see, to absorb the message. This is what happens when you defy order. The guards prod you toward the gate. The city falls away. Dust clings to your feet, the sky presses hot against your back. You don't march to death, you stagger, step by agonizing step, toward a symbol carved into the landscape itself. At last you reach the hill. Maybe it's Golgotha, maybe a roadside near the city, maybe a barren field where vultures already circle. Romans loved visibility. These crosses weren't hidden away, but planted where merchants, travelers, and children would see them. A crucifixion was both punishment and billboard. The upright post is waiting, deeply stained not with varnish, but with the memory of others. The soldiers toss your beam down. You're thrown onto it, arms stretched wide. Rope binds your wrists tight. And then come the nails, iron spikes, as thick as a man's finger. Not through the delicate palm, but the wrist where bone can hold. The hammer rises, falls. The sound cracks through the air, metal on flesh. The world becomes pain, but the process isn't finished. They haul you upward beam, and all fixing the patibulum into the stipes. Your body jerks as wood locks into place. Feet are bound or nailed, forcing you to bear weight in unnatural ways. And there you hang, not yet dead, but displayed. The cross wasn't designed to kill swiftly. It was a machine of endurance, dragging death out for hours, sometimes days. Muscles cramp, lungs strain, thirst gnaws at you. Every attempt to breathe means pushing against nails, scraping raw wounds on wood. It's not the stab of pain that breaks you, but the endlessness of it. And always the crowd. That's the worst part. Farmers wander by staring as if at livestock. Merchants pause, adjust their loads and watch. Children point. Mockery stings worse than the wounds. Where's your pride now? Where's your rebellion? Sing for us, thief. Your body becomes a public lesson. Your agony, a living sermon about Rome's power. And if the day drags on too long, the soldiers may break your legs to speed it up. Without the push of your feet, your lungs collapse quickly. Mercy Roman style is still brutal. Step back for a moment. Why did Rome cling to this horror? Why not a cleaner blade, a swift garrote? The answer lies in psychology. Crucifixion wasn't just death, it was deterrence carved into the skyline. Slaves plotting rebellion, they only had to glance at a cross by the roadside to remember their place. Bandits planning ambushes, they'd think twice after seeing comrades left to rot in the sun. Crucifixion turned corpses into scarecrows, warning signs in flesh and bone. The symbolism cut deep. The cross lifted the condemned above the earth, but denied them the heavens suspended in limbo, stripped of burial, of honor, of closure. Romans believed dying without proper rites was a fate worse than death itself, and crucifixion guaranteed it. Dogs, crows, and vultures finished what the executioners began until nothing remained but bone. Sometimes it wasn't just one cross, but dozens. After the slave revolt of Spartacus in 71 BCE, 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, lining the road like grotesque milestones for miles. Imagine traveling that road mile after mile of silent agony, bodies creaking in the wind, the stench of decay following you like a shadow. Rome didn't just kill its enemies, it displayed them, turned them into a living map of terror. And yet, for all its cruelty, crucifixion was weirdly theatrical. There was a rhythm to it, a script. The condemned paraded through town, the crowd gathered, the soldiers carried out their routine. It was public drama with predictable beats, a grim play everyone knew, but no one wanted to star in. As night falls, the torches flicker against your skin. Your voice is hoarse, your breath shallow. You're not the first to hang here, and you won't be the last. The stars above Rome do not blink, no matter how many crosses rise beneath them. Eventually, exhaustion wins. Your body sags, chest-heavy lungs, refusing the effort. Death comes not with a bang, but with a slow, slipping silence. And when it does, the soldiers shrug. To them, you're just another job, another demonstration checked off the list. They leave your body there a warning until weather and carrion finish their work. Yet crucifixion outlived Rome. It burned itself into memory, not just because of its cruelty, but because one execution centuries later transformed its meaning. The death of Jesus of Nazareth turned the cross from Rome's symbol of fear into Christianity's symbol of hope. What once meant humiliation became a sign of redemption. History, with its strange sense of irony, inverted the meaning completely. But for you condemned in this imagined bedtime tale, there is no redemption. Only the creak of rope, the sting of iron, the mockery of strangers, and the long, slow unraveling of breath. The cross is not a metaphor yet. It's wood, it's nails, its agony stretched across the horizon. So as you lie safe in your bed, warm under your blanket, remember Rome's punishments weren't just about ending lives. They were about sending messages, crafting stories in flesh and spectacle. Tonight's story ends on a hill with a body silhouetted against the sky. And tomorrow, Rome will find another way to turn cruelty into theater. Close your eyes, let the hill fade, let the torches dim. The cross remains behind, stark and lonely, a shadow etched forever into human history. The cell door grinds open and light floods in. You blink, chained, herded toward the tunnel that smells of dust, sweat, and iron. Above you, the roar is deafening. The crowd has been waiting, restless, hungry for spectacle. And you, condemned criminal, runaway slave, or unlucky prisoner of war, are today's entertainment. You already know what your sentence means. Damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. A phrase short and almost elegant, but behind it hides a theater of blood. Unlike the clean cut of the executioner's axe, this is no quick dispatch. This is Rome at its most creative, its most theatrical. The passage opens and sunlight blinds you. The arena spreads vast and golden sand, raked smooth like a canvas. The stands rise tier after tier, packed with tens of thousands. Senators lounge in shaded seats. Merchants chatter betting on how long you'll last. Children clutch figs and point with delight. Above them, all the emperor, or at least his magistrates, preside with calm detachment. The crowd doesn't see you as a person anymore. You are part of the script, a character in Rome's daily drama. The herald announces the charge. A thief, a traitor, a runaway. Whatever your crime, it hardly matters. The mob wants only what comes next. From the gates opposite, handlers emerge, prodding cages forward. The growls echo before the doors even open. Lions, panthers, bears, beasts, pulled from the far corners of Rome's empire. Africa, the east, even the forests of Germania. The empire conquered the world, and now it parades the world's furies into this ring. The doors slam open. A lion steps into the light mane, rippling eyes gleaming with hunger and confusion. It has been starved for days, goaded with whips. The smell of your sweat reaches its nostrils, and its muscles ripple as it crouches low. The crowd roars as one. This is the moment they paid for. You trembling, clutching nothing but perhaps a wooden stake or a blunt sword, stand between the beast and glory. There will be no escape, no negotiation. The sands of the Colosseum are thirsty, and Rome is eager to watch you feed them. The lion lunges. Dust explodes around its paws, claws flashing, jaws wide enough to crush a skull. You stumble, try to dodge, hear the snap of teeth inches from your arm. The crowd gasps and cheers, a single living organism swelling with sound. This isn't just death. This is choreography. Trainers sometimes extend the spectacle, releasing one animal at a time, letting you run stumble fight. Sometimes condemned prisoners are dressed in costumes made to play roles. Mythic villains hunted by beasts as if reenacting a legend. A man dressed as Orpheus mauled by bears. Another as Prometheus chained while vultures tear at him. Rome's cruelty came wrapped in theatre, cruelty softened not with pity but with pageantry. The animals circle. A panther darts in claws, raking your side before melting back into the shadows. A bear lumbers forward, swatting with paws heavy as hammers. The lion returns blood, already staining its muzzle. Every cry from your lips fuels the frenzy of the stands. The arena is a feast not only for beasts, but for the human appetite for spectacle. Why this punishment? Because it was public, spectacular, and useful. Rome turned justice into a festival. Executions were the warm-up act before gladiators fought. They thrilled the crowd, reminded slaves and criminals of Rome's absolute power, and gave the masses a story to take home. I saw a man torn in half today. Did you hear the bones crack? And yet there is something strangely symmetrical in the sight. Rome tamed the world, caged its beasts, and then unleashed them upon the empire's unwanted. The condemned became prey in the most literal sense, stripped of humanity, reduced to a trembling creature at the mercy of tooth and claw. If death didn't come quickly, soldiers might intervene to help the animals finish the job. Not out of kindness, but because the crowd grew impatient. A swift stab here, a push there, and the beast's hunger did the rest. The sands turned red, the bodies dragged away, the arena raked smooth again. Another act finished, ready for the next. The show must always go on. Step back away from the blood. What did all this mean? Rome was never shy about its motives. The arena was theatre, yes, but also propaganda carved in flesh. Every execution reminded the masses who held power. Every roar of the lion said disobey, and this could be you. For the elite, it was reassurance. Order was preserved. Justice, however brutal, was carried out. For the poor, it was bread and spectacle, distraction from their own hardships. And for the emperor, it was approval ratings. A crowd that cheers is a crowd that obeys. But beneath the surface, the punishment was psychological as much as physical. To be torn apart by beasts was to be stripped of everything that made you human. You became meat, spectacle, cautionary tale. Even your death didn't belong to you. It belonged to the empire staged and consumed. Some victims met it with defiance, standing tall as the beasts charged, refusing to scream. Others begged, crawled, wept, much to the crowd's amusement. In the end, the result was the same silence and the raking of sand to erase your presence. And yet, history is never neat. In later centuries, damnatio ad bestias became infamous for another reason: the execution of early Christians. Their calm endurance, their refusal to renounce their faith, turned Rome's cruelest spectacle into a stage of martyrdom. What was meant to terrify instead inspired. The beasts devoured bodies, but not belief. The arena itself still stands. The Colosseum's arches rise against the Roman sky, weathered but enduring. Tourists wander its corridors, imagining the roars, the sand, the blood. The beasts are gone. The cage is empty. But the memory of damnatio ad bestias lingers, a reminder of how far humans will go to turn punishment into performance. So as you lie safe far from lions and torches, remember, Rome's cruelty was not just about ending life, but about displaying it, about turning death into a lesson, a show, a story. The beasts are sleeping now, their growls lost to history. But once in the heart of Rome, they dined on human fear while the world applauded. Close your eyes, let the crowd fade, let the gates slam shut. The arena falls silent, sand unmarked, beasts unseen. But the shadows of their roars still echo across time, carried on the wind like a warning. The empire was watching, always watching. You trudge along the corridor, chains clinking softly, and a magistrate's hand presses your shoulder with a weight that is both literal and symbolic. Today you are sentenced not to a quick blade, nor the randomness of the arena, but to forced suicide, Rome's kind way of letting someone die with dignity. Or at least the illusion of it. You probably won't survive this, but the illusion is all important. The method varies: a cup of poison, a ceremonial blade, a quiet room away from the prying eyes of the rabble. Your hands tremble as you grasp the vessel. There's an odd, solemn grace in this ritual. Some would say it is mercy. Historians still argue whether it was mercy, pragmatism, or political theatre. The atmosphere is quiet, almost serene compared to the roar of the Colosseum. You can hear the faint drip of water somewhere, a sound so mundane it feels unreal in the context of your impending end. The guards give a brief nod, almost apologetic. Perhaps they've done this hundreds of times, and yet they remain human enough to sense the weight of the moment. You inhale deeply. The taste of metal lingers in your mouth from the chains. Your mind drifts. Do you accept the cup? Do you resist and face a harsher public fate? The choice is yours, though it is more illusion than freedom. As you lift the cup, your thoughts wander to life's absurdities, to mundane annoyances like unpaid debts or a neighbor's dog, and you realize how trivial these once seemed. Forced suicide was reserved for the politically connected or those whom Rome wanted removed quietly. There is a strange prestige in dying this way. You are spared the spectacle, spared the mocking cheers of the crowd. But the gravity presses down. Your life becomes a lesson, a message carved not in blood for all to see, but in whispers among the elite. And as the liquid touches your lips, you understand the paradox. Rome's mercy is both personal and performative. Even in quiet death, your story becomes a cautionary tale. Perhaps someone will tell it, perhaps not. Either way, you walk willingly toward the final threshold, aware of the empire's gaze. If forced suicide is subtle, the wooden donkey is anything but. You are dragged out into the sunlight, eyes squinting against the glare. The instrument waits a narrow, sharply angled wooden frame, its peak cruelly thin-shaped to force your legs apart. You hesitate. Even imagining straddling it makes your spine shiver. The guards are patient, mechanically efficient. One pushes your shoulders, another ensures your feet rest against the base. You slowly climb, aware of every inch of discomfort. The donkey isn't designed to kill, but to humiliate, to imprint pain into memory. Historians still argue whether it was purely punitive or also a spectacle for onlookers, as some reports suggest crowds gathered to watch. Your legs burn, your weight presses against the wood, and each breath reminds you that Rome delights in precision cruelty. Imagine sitting on a chair today that slowly slices into you. You'd scream, of course, but back then even sound could be muted by the surrounding commotion, the distance, the empire's intent. Then comes the twist, rocks tied to feet, a slow descent into agony. You are reminded that even simple punishments can be imaginative. A thief, a rebel, a disobedient soldier, all equal under the wooden donkey's design. The point is humiliation. The point is submission. The point is remembering that comfort and safety belong to others. Pain sharpens the mind. You notice the grooves in the wood carved deliberately. Every curve reminds you of Rome's meticulousness. You imagine carpenters taking pride in crafting instruments that are not only functional, but symbolically perfect. In the world of punishment, even design matters. Eventually, exhaustion takes hold. Your muscles tremble. Thoughts become fleeting. The donkey has done its work. Rome has reminded you that comfort is temporary and humiliation, once given, lingers longer than life itself. Now picture a crowd assembled for a spectacle of flame. You stand tethered, heart pounding as a thin tunica molesta, soaked in pitch or oil, is draped over your shoulders. This is not casual fire. This is a ritualized, choreographed execution, the human torch of imperial Rome. You can smell the chemicals before you feel the heat. The guards light torches, the flames flicker, and suddenly your tunic ignites. The fire is immediate, unrelenting, yet Rome designed it to maximize horror and control. The crowd watches mesmerized. Some cheer, some gasp. This is theater, as much as it is punishment. The sensation is overwhelming heat crawling along your skin lungs, constricting the crackle of fire in your ears. Your senses are consumed by a single element flame. Yet even here, Rome's cruelty is precise. The tunica molesta was intended to prolong awareness, not extinguish it instantly. You are trapped in the middle of a living tableau, the audience absorbing every second. Historians still argue how often this punishment was used versus how often it was exaggerated by chroniclers seeking drama. But even the rumors capture the imagination. Imagine being the centerpiece of an empire's moral theater, flames reflecting in the eyes of thousands. You might close your eyes, but you cannot hide from history, from the spectacle, from the narrative Rome is creating with your body. And while pain dominates, there is also odd clarity. Every detail etches into memory: the scent of burning resin, the shouts of the crowd, the distant sound of guards' commands. Your mind paradoxically floats above observing and experiencing simultaneously. Forced suicide, wooden donkey, tunica molesta, each is a lesson in control, in spectacle, in human ingenuity for cruelty. Eventually, as the body succumbs or the poison takes hold, silence descends. The fire consumes and the tunic burns away. The sand absorbs what it can, the crowd disperses, and Rome moves on, ever efficient, ever theatrical. The lesson remains: the empire controls not only life and death, but also memory, perception, and narrative. The Roman Empire is often remembered as a beacon of law, architecture, military might, and art. Yet behind the marble arches and orderly aqueducts lay a system of punishment that revealed the darker face of Roman authority. In Rome, an execution was rarely a private affair. To kill someone was not enough. It had to be seen, remembered, and serve as a living warning. A punishment became a spectacle, a performance of power, where the state demonstrated its control over both body and memory. For Romans, justice was inseparable from theater. Criminals, traitors, slaves, and even disgraced elites all had their place in this grim stage play. The methods varied from swift and merciful to deliberately humiliating or torturous, but each carried a symbolic weight. It was never simply about ending a life. It was about how that life ended and what message it etched into the collective mind of society. Take the forked collar, for instance. This spiked iron device forced the condemned into an unnatural posture, straining their muscles and punishing even the smallest movement. It was not an instant execution, but a slow, exhausting battle against one's own body. Every twitch became a source of pain, reminding both victim and onlookers that Rome could twist the very act of standing into torment. It wasn't just restraint, it was degradation made visible. Then there was the infamous Tarpeian Rock, a steep cliff on the Capitoline Hill. Traitors were cast down from its heights, their bodies dashed against the stones below. It was more than execution, it was symbolic purification. By hurling a betrayer from the city's sacred cliffs, Rome expelled them violently from its body. The rock itself became infamous, a place where the very earth seemed to conspire with the state in exacting vengeance. Standing near the edge, one could almost feel the weight of centuries of betrayal echoing in the wind. Other punishments were staged for maximum spectacle. To be thrown to the beasts was not only death, it was entertainment. Inside the arena, criminals were pitted against lions, leopards, or bears for the amusement of thousands. The crowd cheered, not just at the kill, but at the choreography of fear. The condemned man's terror became part of the entertainment, his struggle against the wild and allegory of Rome's power to dominate chaos itself. Every animal unleashed was another reminder Rome ruled not only men, but the natural world. For the elite, a different script was written. The Senate or the emperor could order suicide by command. A disgraced general or senator might be handed a cup of poison or a sharp blade with the honor of taking his own life. To refuse meant shame upon one's family. To comply was considered a last gesture of dignity. In this paradox, Rome controlled even the illusion of autonomy. The condemned might appear to choose their death, but in truth, it was merely another way the state extended its reach into the very soul of its citizens. Thus, Roman punishment operated on multiple levels. It struck the flesh, crushed the spirit, and carved fear into the minds of witnesses. To watch someone suffer under iron spikes, to see a body hurled from a cliff, or to cheer as beasts tore into human flesh. These were not random cruelties. They were carefully crafted performances, teaching the lesson that Rome endured because it could punish without limits. If Rome had a grammar of punishment, its vocabulary was pain. The empire understood that suffering communicated more effectively than words, and so it developed punishments that spoke directly to the body. These were not always fatal. Sometimes they were designed to leave a person alive, but forever marked, branded, or silenced. One such example was the wooden donkey. At first glance, it seemed simple, a sharp triangular beam on which the condemned was forced to sit astride. But the longer one balanced on that edge, the deeper the pain became, pressing into muscles, tearing at flesh. It was endurance turned into torture, an instrument that converted the very act of sitting into agony. The donkey did not kill swiftly, but it broke the spirit, teaching that Roman punishment could transform even stillness into torment. Another tool of control was face branding. Criminals, runaway slaves, or deserters could be burned with a hot iron, forever bearing a mark of shame. This was not just physical disfigurement, it was social exile. A branded face meant the person carried their crime like a mask that could never be removed. Everyone who looked at them saw not a man or woman, but a crime embodied. Rome, in its brilliance and cruelty, understood that a punishment etched onto flesh became a lifelong sentence. Perhaps even more haunting was the cutting of the tongue. To silence a person by force was to declare that speech itself could be criminal. In a society where rhetoric and oratory were the tools of politics, law and persuasion, losing one's tongue meant being erased from civic life. The condemned could no longer speak in court, no longer defend themselves, no longer tell their story. Silence became both a prison and a tomb enforced by the state's blade. Rome did not merely silence dissent, it mutilated the very organ of truth. But the empire also wielded punishment with a grim sense of spectacle. The wheel of breaking a device that stretched, twisted, and shattered the body was one of the most feared. The condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel, and with each turn, bone snapped under the pressure of iron hammers. The executioners knew how to prolong the process, breaking limbs methodically, so death came slowly, often only after hours or even days. For the watching crowd, it was a brutal education in Rome's capacity to choreograph suffering. Not all punishments needed fire or iron. Some used nature itself as a weapon. Consider death by ash. Victims could be confined in pits or chambers filled with fine dust. Each breath drew particles deeper into the lungs, choking and suffocating invisibly. No blade, no wound, only the steady drowning of the body in air turned poison. It was a reminder that Rome's reach extended even to the elements, that the environment itself could become an executioner when commanded by the state. Each of these punishments functioned not only as physical torment, but as symbolic messaging. To ride the wooden donkey was to be mocked as both beast and burden. To bear a branded face was to carry the empire's judgment into every interaction. To lose one's tongue was to lose citizenship itself. To break on the wheel was to be displayed like a broken artifact, a cautionary example of what happened when the state was defied. Pain in Rome was a language spoken through flesh, understood by all. Rome's punishments extended even into the realm of memory, ensuring that some people were not only killed, but also erased from history. This was the penalty of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Names could be struck from inscriptions, faces chiseled out of statues, records deleted from archives. To be subjected to this was in many ways worse than death. It meant that one's very existence was denied by the state. In a culture obsessed with legacy and honor, the greatest terror was to vanish as though one had never lived. But not all punishments were invisible. Some lit up the night sky. The burning tunic was one of the most horrifying executions reserved for those accused of grave offenses, including arson itself. The condemned was forced into a garment soaked in pitch or wax, then set alight. The victim became a human torch, their death transforming into a spectacle of flame. The crowd watched not only a body burning, but a morality play the criminal consumed by the very fire they were said to have unleashed. It was both execution and performance, Rome turning destruction into theatre. Together, erasure and fire demonstrate the range of Roman justice, from the silent obliteration of memory to the blazing illumination of punishment. One sought to erase the person so thoroughly that posterity would forget them. The other ensured they would be remembered in horror. In both cases, the message was clear: the state had mastery over not only your body, but also your legacy. Rome could decide whether you were forgotten or unforgettable. To modern eyes, these punishments may appear savage, almost incomprehensible. Yet to Romans, they were logical extensions of a worldview where order had to be maintained at all costs. Rome was not simply punishing individuals, It was educating society, displaying the consequences of betrayal, crime, or rebellion. Every punishment was part of a larger narrative that reinforced the empire's authority. Standing in a Roman forum, one could witness the forked collar bending a man into submission, hear the screams of someone branded or silenced, see a criminal hurled from the Tarpeian Rock, or watch the fire consume a victim in the arena. Each spectacle taught the same lesson Rome endured because it wielded punishment with imagination and mercilessness. Justice was never private. It was a spectacle carved into stone, flesh, memory, and even flame. The legacy of these punishments lingers. They remind us that beneath the achievements of Roman civilization lay a system that used cruelty as both instrument and performance. The empire's greatness was inseparable from its capacity to discipline, to terrify, and to erase. In the end, punishment in Rome was never just about death. It was about control. To live in the empire was to live under the shadow of its punishments, a reminder that at any moment the state could transform your body, your reputation, and even your memory into a weapon of its power. Slavery was the backbone of Roman society. Enslaved people built aqueducts, harvested crops, cooked meals, raised children, and fought in gladiatorial games. Yet because slaves were legally property rather than persons, their punishments were some of the harshest in the empire. For Rome, disciplining a slave was less about justice and more about maintaining control over a workforce that vastly outnumbered their masters. Public beating was a constant threat. Slaves could be whipped for disobedience, shackled for trying to flee, or branded on the forehead with letters that identified them as fugitives. Branding was not just physical pain. It was a lifelong scar that marked them as untrustworthy, reducing their chances of escape, since anyone could recognize a branded runaway. In this way, punishment served as an early form of surveillance inscribed on the body. The most extreme form of slave punishment was crucifixion. Reserved for rebels, thieves, or those who struck their masters, it turned the slave's body into a billboard of terror. The condemned was nailed or tied to a wooden cross, left to hang for hours or days, exposed to the sun, wind, and jeering crowds. Death came slowly through exhaustion and suffocation. The location was often chosen carefully, roadsides, hills, or city gates, so the maximum number of people would witness the agony. To see a crucified slave was to be reminded of the absolute hierarchy of Roman life. Citizens commanded, slaves obeyed, and rebellion led to death on display. One of the most infamous examples occurred after the Spartacus revolt in 71 BCE. Following the defeat of the slave arm, the general Crassus ordered 6,000 captured rebels to be crucified along the Appian Way, stretching for over 100 miles. Travelers entering Rome had to pass an unbroken line of tortured bodies. The message could not have been clearer. Rome would never tolerate a challenge from those it considered property. Yet even lesser punishments carried a heavy symbolic weight. A runaway might be forced to wear a metal collar inscribed with the words, "Hold me lest I escape and return me to my master." Punishment thus merged with humiliation, transforming the slave into a walking advertisement of submission. Every punishment reminded the enslaved that they had no control over their bodies, their labor or their fate. The whip, the collar, and the cross were not just tools of discipline, they were the foundation of Rome's social order. Roman citizens enjoyed protections under law, but these were never absolute. While a free man could not legally be crucified, he was not immune from brutal punishment. Instead, Rome devised other ways to enforce obedience while preserving a sense of hierarchy. For lesser crimes, fines or exile were common. Yet when treason, desertion, or grave offenses were involved, even citizens found themselves subjected to humiliating or deadly penalties. Exile was one of the most frequent punishments for elites who fell from grace. A senator accused of corruption or conspiracy might be banished to a distant island, stripped of wealth and status. To Romans, exile was worse than death for some. It cut a man off from family fortune and civic honor. Even when alive, he was socially dead. Others were forced into honorable suicide, choosing poison or the blade to avoid public disgrace. Such acts reinforced the illusion that a Roman elite could still control his fate, though in reality, the state had already scripted the ending. For soldiers, discipline was both more rigid and more brutal. The Roman legions functioned on obedience, and any breach of order threatened the survival of the army. Thus, punishments were engineered to terrify entire units. A soldier who fell asleep on guard duty, for instance, could be stoned to death by his comrades. Cowardice in battle could bring flogging, dismissal in shame, or even execution. Yet the most feared punishment was decimation. When a unit was guilty of mutiny or desertion, 1 in every 10 soldiers was chosen by lot and beaten to death by the others. The randomness ensured that no man felt safe, and the collective violence forced comrades to turn on one another, reinforcing discipline through shared fear. The punishments of soldiers reveal much about Roman thinking. Whereas slaves were punished to enforce submission, soldiers were punished to enforce unity. The state needed them not just obedient, but utterly reliable. By making them instruments of each other's terror, Rome welded its armies into engines of discipline. In both cases, slaves and soldiers, the goal was the same: to maintain order through calculated cruelty. At the top of society stood the senatorial and equestrian classes, the aristocrats who shaped Rome's politics and culture. Yet even they were not immune to punishment. In fact, their punishments were often designed with theatrical irony, stripping away the dignity they prized most. One of the most symbolic penalties was damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. Unlike a slave whose branded face made them unforgettable, an elite Roman could be erased from history altogether. Names were removed from inscriptions, portraits defaced, honors annulled. It was as if Rome declared, "You do not exist." For men who lived to secure their family's legacy, this was annihilation beyond the grave. Generals who once commanded legions could vanish from official history, leaving only scars in stone where their names once stood. Execution among elites often came with ritual formality. A disgraced noble might be handed a dagger and told to fall on it, sparing his family confiscation of property. Others were offered hemlock, echoing Greek traditions of philosophical death. To outsiders, this may look merciful, But in truth, it was coercion disguised as honor. By giving the condemned a semblance of choice, Rome maintained the fiction of aristocratic dignity while tightening its grip on control. Fire, too, played a role in elite punishment. The burning tunic was not only for slaves or arsonists, it could also be imposed on wealthy men accused of sacrilege or treachery. For elites, fire was the great equalizer. Silk garments and gold rings burned just as easily as rough wool. In those flames, the social order dissolved into ash, and the crowd saw proof that no rank could shield one from the empire's wrath. In all these cases, punishment was a mirror reflecting Rome's values. Slaves were punished as objects, soldiers as instruments, citizens as members of the civic body, and elites as guardians of honor. Each group faced its own brand of discipline, but all served the same purpose: to uphold the stability of the Roman world. Punishment was not random cruelty. It was architecture made from fear, a system that supported aqueducts, forums, and armies as much as stone and steel did. To understand Roman punishment, one must step into the Roman mind. Unlike modern systems that emphasize rehabilitation, Rome's punishments were never intended to reform the offender. They were meant to deter, to humiliate, and to showcase the majesty of the state. Justice was not blind in Rome. It was theatrical, political, and deeply entwined with social hierarchy. Roman law was on the surface highly advanced. Contracts, citizenship rights, and property law influenced Europe for centuries. Yet when it came to crime and punishment, the system revealed its true purpose: maintaining order above all. Punishment was not measured by fairness, but by utility. If crucifying 1,000 slaves kept millions obedient, then crucifixion was justified. If erasing a senator's name from history preserved loyalty to the emperor, then memory itself could be weaponized. Philosophically, Romans inherited from the Stoics the idea that pain could be endured with dignity. But the state twisted this philosophy into a tool. Executions of elites were framed as tests of character. Could the condemned drink poison calmly? Could he fall on his sword without hesitation? Those who complied were praised for their stoicism, while those who resisted were shamed as cowards. Thus, even death became a stage for virtue or for disgrace. The state also claimed punishment as a religious duty. To kill a traitor or arsonist was not only to protect the community, but also to appease the gods. Fires, plagues, and invasions were often interpreted as signs of divine anger. Punishing offenders became a ritual of purification, cleansing Rome of guilt and restoring divine favor. The Tarpeian Rock, for instance, was not just a cliff. It was a sacred site where the city expelled its impurities. In this way, Roman punishment was justified on every level: legal, philosophical, religious. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but a carefully rationalized system where pain served order, memory, and the gods. To question it was to question Rome itself. No aspect of Roman punishment is more infamous than the spectacle of the arena. Gladiatorial combat, beast hunts, and public executions turned human suffering into mass entertainment. In the Colosseum and countless provincial amphitheaters, tens of thousands of spectators gathered not only to watch skillful duels, but also to witness the punishment of criminals. For the condemned being thrown to the beasts was a sentence that merged execution with performance. Lions, leopards, and bears were starved before being unleashed, ensuring ferocity. Criminals were sometimes given wooden swords or shields, forcing them into hopeless combat. The crowd roared at every wound, at every desperate attempt to fend off claws and teeth. Death was certain, but the manner of dying was what mattered. Did the condemned face it bravely, like a gladiator, or in terror like a coward? The answer determined how the crowd judged them, and by extension, how Rome judged them. Executions were often staged as mythological reenactments. A thief might be dressed as Orpheus, only to be mauled by wild animals. An arsonist might play the role of Hercules consumed by fire. In this way, punishment became story blending myth with justice. The criminal's suffering illustrated timeless lessons, reinforcing both Rome's cultural identity and its control over life and death. The arena also served political purposes. Emperors used games to demonstrate generosity, providing free entertainment while also displaying the consequences of crime. To kill criminals in the Colosseum was to remind the people that order and pleasure were intertwined. The blood of the condemned was not spilled in secret, but in front of tens of thousands. Justice in Rome was a shared experience, witnessed by the many, inflicted on the few. It is tempting to view such spectacles as barbaric, but to Romans they were civilizing. The arena disciplined not just criminals, but the crowd itself, binding citizens together in a collective act of witnessing. Each scream, each drop of blood reminded them of the power that sustained their society. The arena was not simply sport. It was theater of sovereignty, where Rome itself was the main actor. When we look back at Roman punishment, the temptation is to recoil, to dismiss it as savagery from a distant past. But the truth is more unsettling. Rome's punishments influenced the world long after the empire fell. Crucifixion, branding, mutilation, and public executions echoed through medieval Europe, adapted and reinterpreted by kings and churches. The idea that pain could teach obedience, that death could be a spectacle, did not end with Rome. It became a model. Even today, the Roman fascination with punishment lingers in subtler forms. Our courtrooms, with their rituals and symbolism, echo Rome's blending of law and theater. Our fascination with true crime and public trials carries the same impulse: justice as spectacle, suffering as story. The shadow of the Colosseum stretches long across history, reminding us that the line between justice and cruelty is never clear. Yet Rome also left behind lessons in the dangers of unchecked power. By making punishment a tool of politics, Rome revealed how easily justice can become tyranny. The erasure of names, the silencing of speech, the burning of bodies, all were justified as necessary for order. But in truth, they also eroded the very humanity Rome claimed to protect. To maintain its empire, Rome sacrificed compassion, turning law into weapon and memory into battlefield. In the end, Roman punishments show us a paradox. The same civilization that built aqueducts, codified law, and inspired democracy also devised some of the most terrifying methods of execution ever known. Greatness and cruelty walked hand in hand. The forked collar, the Tarpeian Rock, the beasts of the arena, the burning tunic all remind us that civilization is not measured by monuments alone, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. Rome endured for centuries, not only because of its roads, armies, or institutions, but also because it wielded fear with extraordinary skill. Punishment was the invisible mortar, binding its society, holding together slaves, citizens, soldiers, and elites in a system of control. Yet this same reliance on cruelty sowed seeds of decline, for a society built on fear is always haunted by rebellion, by resentment, and by the memory of suffering. And perhaps that is Rome's final legacy, a warning. The empire that conquered the known world could not conquer its own addiction to punishment. It could master bodies and memories, but in doing so, it revealed the fragility of power built on pain. To study Roman punishments is not only to explore history, it is to confront the timeless truth that power and cruelty are never far apart, and that the price of fear is always written in human flesh. To live in Rome was to live under constant awareness of punishment. From the humblest slave to the most powerful senator, everyone knew that the state's wrath could descend swiftly and without mercy. Punishments were not hidden behind prison walls, as they often are today. They were staged in forums, on roadsides, in amphitheaters, and at city gates. Rome ensured that no one could escape the sight or the memory of what happened to those who broke the law. Imagine walking down the Appian Way and seeing rows of crucified bodies, their forms twisting in the wind. Or entering the marketplace to see a thief branded his face, seared with the letter that would follow him forever. The very geography of Rome was inscribed with punishment. Rocks, roads, arenas, and even household walls could become instruments of justice. Citizens absorbed these images from childhood, and the fear they created became a permanent part of the Roman psyche. Fear was not just an emotion. It was a political tool. By ensuring that punishments were visible and memorable, the state controlled behavior without needing to punish everyone. A few highly public executions kept thousands obedient. Fear multiplied itself, echoing in rumors, stories, and the imagination of the people. The true genius of Roman punishment was that it turned every citizen into a participant in enforcing order. When neighbors whispered about the man hurled from the Tarpeian Rock, or when a child pointed at a branded face in the forum, the lesson was learned without the need for more blood. This system bred obedience, but it also bred anxiety. Romans lived in a society where the line between citizen and criminal could shift overnight. A senator could become an exile. A general could be ordered to drink poison. A slave could become a spectacle for lions. The fear of punishment was not only for criminals, it was for everyone. In that fear, Rome found stability. Beyond fear, Roman punishments also functioned as theater, a stage where emperors, magistrates, and generals displayed their authority. Justice was not blind in Rome, it was performed. Every execution, every branding, every crucifixion was an act of political communication. Consider the Colosseum. When emperors presided over games, they were not only providing entertainment, but also demonstrating their generosity and control. By feeding criminals to beasts before tens of thousands, the emperor reminded the crowd that he alone held the power of life and death. The people left the amphitheater not only thrilled, but also reassured and warned about the might of their ruler. Bloodshed became a currency of legitimacy. Public punishments also reinforced social divisions. When a slave was crucified while a citizen faced exile, the message was clear: the law was not equal. It was calibrated to reinforce hierarchy. Punishment became a mirror of society's structure, dramatizing who held power and who did not. Even the method of execution spoke volumes. To be hurled from the Tarpeian Rock marked one as a traitor to the city. To be forced into suicide preserved a nobleman's dignity while still erasing his threat. Each punishment was tailored not only to the crime, but to the social rank of the condemned. Politicians used punishment as spectacle to win favor or instill fear. Julius Caesar pardoned enemies to display mercy. His successors often staged executions to prove strength. Under emperors like Nero and Domitian, executions became tools of paranoia, eliminating rivals while entertaining the masses. The line between justice and politics blurred until it vanished. In Rome, punishment was not just about crime, it was about power, theater, and survival. For the people watching, the spectacle was double-edged. They were entertained, yes, but they were also reminded of their own vulnerability. Each punishment was a drama with a moral. This could be you, unless you remain loyal. Rome's rulers mastered the art of weaving fear into fascination, turning cruelty into a civic ritual. The impact of Roman punishment did not end with the death of the condemned. It lingered in memory, rumor, and collective imagination. Punishment was designed to echo long after the spectacle was over. Inscriptions scratched into walls told of crucifixions and executions. Oral stories carried details of gruesome deaths from one generation to the next. Children grew up hearing of lions in the arena or of generals who fell on their swords. These stories became cultural myths, shaping the way Romans understood justice and power. Punishment was not only an event, it was a narrative retold until it became part of Rome's identity. Religion reinforced this afterlife of suffering. Executions were sometimes framed as sacrifices, offerings that cleansed the city of guilt. The memory of a burning tunic or a man thrown from the Tarpeian Rock was not only political theater, but also religious ritual. Punishment became part of the sacred order, convincing Romans that cruelty was divinely sanctioned. The gods, it seemed, demanded both justice and spectacle. Psychologically, punishment left deep scars. Slaves internalized fear of the whip and collar. Soldiers drilled discipline into their bones, knowing that a single mistake could mean death by their comrades' hands. Citizens learned to tread carefully, aware that political tides could sweep them from power to disgrace. Even emperors were haunted by the punishments they ordered, for history shows that those who ruled by fear often perished by it. Caligula, Nero, and Domitian all used punishment as terror, and all fell violently themselves. The memory of Roman punishments extended beyond the empire. Medieval Europe revived crucifixion branding and public executions, inheriting Rome's philosophy that suffering could preserve order. Even in modern times, echoes remain. Public trials, death penalties, and the fascination with crime all trace their ancestry to Rome's theatre of punishment. Ultimately, the afterlife of suffering reveals the paradox of Roman civilization. The same empire that built aqueducts and codified law also normalized spectacles of cruelty. Its legacy is a warning that the line between justice and terror is fragile, and that when punishment becomes theater society, risks turning fear into its foundation. Rome was not the only society to use cruelty as a tool of justice, but its scale and theatricality made it unique. To truly grasp Rome's legacy, we must set it alongside the punishments of other civilizations. In ancient Greece, punishments could be severe, but were rarely as spectacular. Athens preferred exile fines or at times poisoning, as in the famous death of Socrates. Public executions were rare, for the polis valued moderation and civic shame more than bloody display. The Greeks believed in deterrence, but they did not build amphitheaters to watch men torn apart by beasts. In contrast, the Persians and Carthaginians also practiced gruesome methods. The Persians employed impalement, a punishment that skewered the body for days until death. Carthage, Rome's great rival, allegedly sacrificed children to their gods, though the extent remains debated. Rome absorbed elements of these cultures, but it was Rome that perfected the transformation of punishment into a spectacle of sovereignty. Where others executed in private or ritual form, Rome executed on stage. The Romans also distinguished themselves in the diversity of punishments applied to different classes of people. Few societies codified so clearly that slaves, soldiers, citizens, and elites would each suffer differently. In China, the Han dynasty enforced mutilations and executions, but they were applied more uniformly. In India, caste played a role in punishment, but not with the same theatrical hierarchy Rome displayed. What makes Rome stand out is the fusion of law, religion, and entertainment. Punishment was not only a penalty, it was a ritual purification, a political tool, and a civic performance all at once. Few societies, ancient or modern, blended these elements so completely. Rome's amphitheaters, crucifixions, and erasures of memory remain some of history's most chilling examples of how power can be staged through suffering. As Rome transitioned from republic to empire, punishments grew harsher and more spectacular. Yet over time, new forces began to erode the system of cruelty. One was Christianity. Emerging first as a persecuted faith, Christians themselves endured Rome's worst punishments, crucifixion, burning, and the arena. Their martyrs turned Roman cruelty into stories of faith, where suffering became victory rather than defeat. Over centuries, this inversion changed the cultural meaning of punishment. The cross, once the ultimate symbol of terror, became a sacred emblem of salvation. Rome's tool of fear was transformed into the heart of a new religion. As Christianity gained power, it reshaped attitudes toward cruelty. Public executions did not vanish, but the idea of mercy gained ground. Bishops and priests argued for repentance over spectacle. By the late empire, gladiatorial games were fading, condemned by Christian leaders as bloodlust unworthy of a civilized society. In 404 CE, the monk Telemachus famously threw himself between gladiators to stop a fight, and though killed by the crowd, he inspired imperial decrees against the games. Another factor was imperial stability, or the lack of it. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, Rome was beset by invasions, civil wars, and economic crises. Punishments could still terrify, but they no longer guaranteed obedience. Soldiers mutinied despite decimation. Cities rebelled despite crucifixions. Fear could maintain order for a time, but it could not rebuild a collapsing empire. Rome discovered the limits of cruelty once trust in government faltered. Punishment lost its effectiveness. Finally, cultural blending softened Rome's edges. As Germanic tribes entered Roman lands, as Christianity spread, as new philosophies arose, the obsession with theatrical punishment diminished. The empire's focus shifted from spectacle to survival. By the time the Western Empire fell in 476 CE, the Colosseum still stood, but its role as a theater of death was over. Rome's cruelty had left a scar on history, but its own society could not sustain the system forever. The legacy of Roman punishment still haunts us. Though we no longer crucify slaves or hurl traitors from cliffs, echoes of Rome remain in how societies treat crime, justice, and spectacle. Public executions persisted through medieval and early modern Europe. Hangings, burnings, beheadings all carried forward the Roman principle that justice must be seen. Even today, the death penalty continues in some countries, often staged as a demonstration of state power. The debate over whether punishment should deter reform or simply exact revenge remains unresolved, a philosophical inheritance from Rome. The concept of erasing memory also persists in subtler ways. When statues are toppled, when names are stripped from institutions, we see echoes of damnatio memoriae. Modern societies like Rome use memory as a battlefield, deciding who is honored and who is forgotten. Though no longer enforced with chisels and hammers, the struggle over remembrance carries the same logic. Identity is power, and memory can be punished. Even entertainment carries Roman shadows. While we no longer cheer executions in arenas, we consume endless stories of crime, punishment, and violence on screens. The fascination with suffering, the blending of justice with spectacle, continues in different form. Rome reminds us that cruelty is not just a relic of the past, it is a temptation that societies return to, cloaked in new guises. Yet Rome also offers a warning. Fear can maintain order, but only for a time. A society built on cruelty may appear strong, but it corrodes from within. Rome's reliance on punishment reveals the fragility of power when it rests on suffering rather than justice. The fall of the empire reminds us that no amount of crucifixions or executions can preserve a system that has lost legitimacy. For the modern world, the lesson is stark. True justice requires more than punishment. It requires fairness, compassion, and legitimacy. Rome, for all its greatness, failed in this balance. Its roads and laws endure, but so too does the memory of its cruelty. To study Rome is to confront the eternal question, do we wield punishment as justice or as power? The answer determines not only how we treat criminals, but how history will judge us. The shadow of Roman punishment stretches farther than we might expect. It is not only in our laws or our debates about the death penalty, but in the very way societies understand justice, fear, and performance. Rome proved that punishment is never just about the body of the condemned. It is about the psychology of the many who watch. That principle endures. Consider the rise of mass media. Trials today are often broadcast dissected on television and across social platforms. The world tunes in to see guilt or innocence proclaimed, to watch the faces of the accused, to analyze every gesture. While we no longer gather in amphitheaters to cheer a crucifixion, we gather online to witness justice in real time. The crowd has not vanished, it has gone digital. Rome's arena lives on in the spectacle of the screen. Even our fascination with punishment as story echoes Roman habits. True crime podcasts, courtroom dramas, and historical documentaries all thrive on the same paradox: we are horrified by suffering, yet drawn to watch. Rome turned executions into myths by clothing criminals in the roles of Hercules or Orpheus. We turn crimes into narratives, shaping them into morality tales. In both cases, punishment is transformed into meaning for the wider audience. Perhaps the most urgent lesson Rome offers is this: cruelty can disguise itself as order. Rome believed it was preserving civilization by crucifying rebels, branding slaves, and silencing dissent. But in doing so, it normalized violence as the language of power. Modern states risk the same temptation to confuse deterrence with justice, to let fear replace fairness. Each time punishment becomes more about performance than principle, we repeat Rome's error. Yet Rome also shows us the possibility of transformation. Christianity turned the cross from terror into hope, reshaping cultural meaning itself. This reminds us that symbols of cruelty can be reinterpreted, that societies can learn and change. The memory of Rome's punishments lingers not only as warning, but as opportunity to build systems of justice rooted not in fear, but in dignity. What did it feel like to be punished in Rome? History often tells us of laws, emperors, and spectacles, but rarely of the trembling heart of the condemned. To step into their world is to understand the deepest cost of Rome's justice, not in numbers, but in flesh, fear, and silence. Imagine a man bound in the forked collar, iron spikes digging into his shoulders and neck. Every movement cuts. Sleep becomes impossible, eating a torment. He is not only immobilized, but transformed into a display, forced to exist in public agony. For him, each minute stretches into eternity. Death may not come quickly, but dignity already has. Rome's genius lay in turning survival itself into a punishment. Or consider the condemned at the Tarpeian Rock. As guards marched him up the Capitoline Hill, he would see the city spread below temples, markets, the heart of Rome itself. He would know he was about to be expelled not only from life, but from the sacred community. The fall was short, but the terror lay in the symbolism, the city rejecting him with its own earth. In those last moments, he was not just a man, he was a traitor, made into an example. The most visceral experiences belong to those condemned to the arena. Standing in the sand, waiting as cages rattled and lions roared, the body must have been paralyzed by fear. The smell of dust, sweat, and blood filled the air. Above thousands of faces looked down, not with pity, but with expectation. For the victim, terror was multiplied by spectacle. To die alone is one thing. To die as entertainment is another. Many begged, some resisted, others accepted their fate with grim resolve. But all shared the knowledge that their deaths were no longer their own, they belonged to Rome. Psychologically, the condemned endured isolation worse than pain. The branded slave knew that every glance would forever reduce him to a criminal. The man silenced by a cut tongue lived in a prison of speechlessness, unable to defend or define himself. The noble forced into suicide faced the paradox of honor in dishonor, compelled to act with dignity, even as dignity was stripped away. In every case, punishment annihilated individuality, reducing the condemned to symbol. For the victims, Rome's punishments were not abstractions of law or philosophy. They were moments of fear, shame, agony, and despair. And though their voices rarely survive in history, the scars they bore remind us that behind every Roman execution was a human being enduring the unimaginable. If the condemned were the actors, the Roman people were the audience. Punishment was never private. It was performed precisely so others could see. But how did ordinary Romans respond? Were they horrified, thrilled, indifferent? The answer is as complex as the society itself. At the Colosseum, crowds poured in by the tens of thousands. They came for games, spectacle, and social gathering. Executions were only part of the entertainment woven between gladiatorial duels and hunts. For many, watching criminals torn by beasts was simply part of the day's amusements, no more shocking than chariot races in the Circus Maximus. Children, women, men, senators, all attended. To them, suffering was normalized, even ritualized. Yet not all reactions were so casual. Ancient writers record moments when crowds pitied the condemned, demanding mercy or applauding courage. A criminal who faced beasts bravely could earn respect, even admiration. The line between villain and hero blurred depending on performance. In some cases, emperors pardoned the condemned to please the crowd. The people thus held a strange power. They could turn punishment into spectacle, but also spectacle into reprieve. Punishments outside the arena were less festive, but no less public. Crucifixions on roadsides drew passers-by who gawked, mocked, or prayed. Branding in the Forum forced citizens to watch as a man was marked for life. The Tarpeian Rock turned cliffs into civic theaters. To live in Rome was to be constantly surrounded by suffering. These sights shaped collective psychology, teaching lessons through repetition. Why did Romans accept such spectacles? Part of the answer lies in their worldview. Rome was built on hierarchy, discipline, and order. To witness punishment was to witness society reaffirming itself. Each branded face, each hanging body, reassured citizens that the system was intact. Fear mingled with fascination, horror with satisfaction. Punishment was not only deterrence, but also reassurance. but we must also remember those who resisted. Philosophers criticized cruelty. Christians condemned the games, declaring that bloodshed corrupted the soul. Some Romans found the spectacles distasteful, seeing them as symptoms of decadence. While many cheered, others looked away, ashamed of what Rome had become. The crowd was never uniform. It contained both complicity and conscience. In this tension between fascination and revulsion lay the true power of Roman punishment. It forced every witness to choose to accept, to cheer, to pity, or to condemn. And in doing so, it bound the entire society into the drama of cruelty. Though victims died and crowds dispersed, punishments lived on through memory, art, and cultural imagination. Rome ensured that cruelty outlived the moment, echoing through time. Inscriptions and graffiti recorded punishments, mocking criminals or praising martyrs. Roman historians described executions not only to inform but to moralize. Plays and poems echoed the imagery of the arena, embedding it into culture. Even art carried these shadows. Mosaics showed gladiators' reliefs, depicted captives. Coins bore symbols of conquest and submission. Punishment was not only lived, it was remembered, represented, and celebrated. Religiously, memory was reworked. Christians retold stories of martyrs who faced Roman cruelty. Their suffering became sacred narrative, transforming instruments of punishment into symbols of faith. The cross, once Rome's cruelest invention, became Christianity's holiest emblem. Through memory, victims reclaimed meaning, from suffering reversing Rome's intent. What was meant to erase dignity instead created legacy. Culturally, memory of cruelty shaped Roman identity. Citizens defined themselves against the punished. I am free, I am obedient, therefore I am safe. The spectacle created boundaries between belonging and exclusion. Rome built unity not only with roads and armies, but also with shared recollections of punishment. The memory of cruelty became part of the glue holding society together. But memory also haunted Rome. Stories of emperors who executed mercilessly often painted them as tyrants. Nero, Domitian, and Caligula are remembered less for their laws than for their cruelties. Memory turned against them, proving that punishment can backfire, staining rulers with infamy instead of glory. The very acts designed to enforce order became evidence of corruption and decadence. Beyond Rome, these memories spread into Europe. Medieval tortures drew from Roman precedents. Artists, monks, and chroniclers revived tales of Roman cruelty as warnings or inspirations. Even today, films and books return to the Colosseum crucifixions and brutal spectacles, fascinated by the same paradox that haunted Romans, the allure of punishment as story. Thus, memory gave Roman punishments an afterlife, longer than the empire itself. They live not only in ruins and texts, but in imagination, shaping how humanity thinks about justice, cruelty, and power. Rome taught the world that punishment is never just an act. It is an inheritance, a shadow that lingers across centuries. Across the centuries, Rome constructed not only roads, aqueducts, and temples, but also an invisible structure, an architecture of fear. Punishments were the pillars, fear was the mortar, and society itself was the edifice that stood upon it. Every punishment carried a double meaning. The forked collar showed that the smallest act of disobedience could twist a human body into torment. The Tarpeian Rock declared that traitors would be expelled violently from the sacred community. Crucifixions turned the landscape into a forest of suffering, each cross a warning sign along Rome's highways. The arena staged death as entertainment, making cruelty a civic ritual. Even the erasure of names, damnatio memoriae, built walls around memory itself, demonstrating that Rome's reach extended into time. Together, these punishments formed a system far greater than the sum of its parts. They were not isolated acts of violence, but pieces of a vast design. Slaves, citizens, soldiers, and senators each faced punishments tailored to their role, ensuring that the whole hierarchy of society was reinforced. The whip and the brand reminded slaves of their place. Decimation kept soldiers disciplined. Exile and suicide by order humbled the elite. Punishment was Rome's way of sculpting human behavior into a shape that fit the empire's needs. This architecture of fear was visible everywhere. On roadsides where crucified bodies swayed in forums, where branding irons glowed in amphitheaters, where beasts tore flesh in cliffs, where traitors fell, the city itself became a living reminder. Even those who never broke a law lived within this architecture, their choices shaped by its looming threat. It was effective. Rome endured for centuries in part because its punishments instilled obedience. But this system came at a cost. The empire became addicted to cruelty, relying on pain as mortar. Fear held society together, but it also hollowed it out. Rome had built a palace upon foundations of suffering, and in time the cracks began to show. Rome presents us with a paradox. This was the civilization that gave the world the 12 tables of law, magnificent architecture, Latin literature, and roads that still endure. Yet it was also the civilization that normalized crucifixion, burning tunics, and mutilations. How can one society embody such extremes? Part of the answer lies in Rome's obsession with control. The empire stretched across continents, absorbing peoples of different languages, customs, and religions. To govern such diversity, Rome relied not only on laws and armies, but also on fear. Cruelty was the universal language everyone understood, from Britain to Syria. A crucified body spoke more clearly than any decree Rome rules, and defiance leads to torment. But cruelty was not only functional, it was cultural. Romans admired discipline, endurance, and stoicism. Pain was not merely inflicted, it was also expected to be endured with dignity. Executions of elites were framed as tests of character, turning death into a performance of virtue. The arena transformed suffering into myth-blending punishment with storytelling. Rome wove cruelty into its cultural fabric until it became inseparable from identity. This intertwining is what makes Rome so unsettling. Its greatness and its brutality cannot be separated. The aqueduct and the cross, the Colosseum and the crucifixion, the law code and the branding iron all belong to the same civilization. Rome forces us to confront a truth about humanity, that culture and cruelty often advance together, that the monuments of civilization may rest upon foundations of suffering. And yet even within Rome, dissenting voices arose. Philosophers condemned cruelty, Christians rejected the games, and ordinary people sometimes pitied the condemned. Rome was not monolithic. It contained both brutality and compassion. Its story is not simply one of cruelty, but of the struggle between cruelty and conscience. This struggle is the inheritance Rome bequeathed to us all. What then is Rome's final lesson? Why do we linger on its punishments after 2 millennia? The answer is that Rome remains a mirror. To study its cruelty is to see reflections of our own. The spectacle of punishment survives in subtler forms. Today we no longer gather in amphitheaters to cheer executions, yet we watch trials broadcast live crime dramas, reenacted true crime stories, consumed like entertainment. The impulse is the same justice as performance, suffering as narrative. Rome reminds us that fascination with punishment is deeply human and deeply dangerous. The erasure of memory also persists. While chisels no longer strike names from marble, societies still debate who should be honored or forgotten. Statues fall, histories are rewritten, reputations destroyed. Like Rome, we wield memory as punishment, proving that damnatio memoriae was not an ancient relic, but a continuing practice under new forms. The death penalty remains in many nations often justified as deterrence, much as Rome justified crucifixion. Debates rage: does execution protect society, or does it corrode it? Rome's legacy whispers that punishment built on fear may succeed in the short term, but undermines legitimacy in the long. Fear can enforce obedience, but it cannot inspire loyalty. Rome's ultimate warning is that cruelty corrodes even the powerful. Emperors who ruled by terror, Caligula, Nero, Domitian, became symbols of tyranny. Their names endure not for their laws, but for their cruelty. Punishment meant to secure power, instead destroyed it. This lesson is timeless. Leaders who wield fear as their greatest weapon sow the seeds of their own downfall. For the modern world, Rome offers both caution and hope. The caution that when punishment becomes spectacle, when justice becomes cruelty, society builds palaces upon suffering that cannot last. The hope that cruelty can be transformed. Just as the cross became a symbol of faith, so too can modern societies choose compassion over fear, dignity over humiliation. Rome's shadow need not dictate our path, it can illuminate it. In the end, Rome teaches us that civilization is judged not by its monuments, but by its humanity. The empire that ruled the world could not conquer its own addiction to cruelty. We, standing centuries later, must decide whether to repeat its errors or learn from them. To remember Rome's punishments is to confront our own choices. And perhaps that is the truest legacy, not aqueducts or roads, but a question whispered across the centuries: how will we wield justice? As cruelty or as compassion? Rome was not alone in using cruelty as an instrument of rule. Long before the empire rose and long after it fell, other civilizations devised their own punishments, blending law with fear. To drift through these echoes is to understand that Rome's methods, while infamous, were part of a wider human story. In Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi prescribed punishments of striking symmetry: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The laws were carved into stone, displayed for all to see. Much like Rome, these were not just rules but performances of authority. The stone slab was the forerunner of Rome's cross, a public sign that justice was visible and unyielding. Egypt, with its pyramids and priests, rarely staged punishments with Roman theatricality, but its system was equally severe. Forced labor in quarries, branding, and exile to remote deserts stripped offenders not only of freedom, but of identity. Like Rome, Egypt understood that punishment could erase a person as effectively as death. In medieval Europe, Rome's legacy became scripture. Kings and churches revived crucifixion burning and mutilation, cloaking them in Christian language. A heretic's death at the stake echoed Rome's burning tunic. The pillory in a marketplace recalled Roman branding, turning shame into spectacle. Even when civilizations claimed to reject Rome's cruelty, they carried its habits forward, reshaped for their own times. Farther east in China's dynasties, punishments of mutilation, exile, and execution echoed similar themes. The 5 punishments of ancient Chinese law, tattooing, amputation, castration, execution, and flogging, mirrored Rome's principle that punishment should not only inflict pain, but mark the body and the memory. The instruments were different, but the philosophy was shared. Thus, Rome's punishments were not isolated curiosities. They belonged to a global tradition where rulers wielded fear as mortar for society. What makes Rome distinct is not the cruelty itself, but the way it fused cruelty with theater, law, and religion into a single system. Rome did not merely punish, it staged punishment as a language all could understand. And that language, whispered across centuries, traveled far beyond the empire's fall. Today the arenas stand silent. The Colosseum is a hollow shell, its sand long swept away its tunnels, echoing only with the footsteps of tourists. The Tarpeian Rock lies quiet beneath the Roman sun, visited not for executions but for views. The crosses that once lined the Appian Way are gone, replaced by olive groves and stone walls. Yet the silence itself speaks. These ruins are not empty, they are filled with memory. To walk through Rome today is to walk through a city haunted by its own history. Beneath arches of triumph lie shadows of cruelty. In the Vatican's basilicas, where the faithful gather, the memory of Christian martyrs still lingers, blending faith with suffering. The marble forums where senators once debated still recall the moments when names were struck from inscriptions, chisels, erasing memory with as much force as swords. And beyond Rome, memory lingers in language itself. Words like decimation, execution, arena, spectacle all carry Roman ancestry. Even when used metaphorically, a team crucified in a contest, a scandal leading to political exile, the echoes of Roman punishment remain alive in speech. The cruelty of the empire seeps quietly into how we describe life. In art and imagination, the memory thrives. Painters have depicted crucifixions for centuries, sometimes as history, sometimes as devotion. Films replay the arena-filling screens with the roar of lions and the cries of the condemned. Novels retell the struggles of slaves and rebels. Every retelling revives the memory, sometimes romanticized, sometimes condemned, but never forgotten. Rome's punishments endure because they touch something universal, the fascination and horror of seeing suffering turned into meaning. In the ruins and in the memory, cruelty softens into story. What once was terror becomes history. What once was agony becomes lesson. This is the paradox of memory. It preserves pain, but transforms it into something that no longer wounds, only whispers. Rome, in its silence, still speaks, and those whispers guide us to reflection as we linger in the long night of history. The story of Rome's punishments begins to fade like the embers of a fire. The crosses are no longer standing, the collars no longer press into flesh, the beasts no longer roar. What remains is the echo, a reminder that civilization and cruelty often walk side by side, and that power is never free from the temptation of fear. The lesson is not to recoil from Rome in horror, but to understand it with quiet honesty. Rome was brilliant and Rome was brutal. Its aqueducts still stand, its roads still stretch, its law still shapes ours. But its punishments too left their mark, reminding us that the shadow of cruelty is as enduring as the stones of its amphitheaters. To study Rome is to study ourselves, our fascination with justice, our fear of disorder, our temptation to wield pain as power. And so the story slows. The voices of senators fade, the cheers of crowds grow faint, the clang of iron and the crack of whips dissolve into silence. The condemned are at peace. The emperors are long gone. The arenas are dust. What remains is the hush of memory, gentle and continuous, like the tide. As you drift with it, imagine the ancient city not in its moments of cruelty, but in its quiet nights. Torches burn, low streets fall silent, and the Tiber flows softly through the dark. The empire sleeps, and with it the long story of its punishments closes like a book placed gently on a shelf. And in that silence, one question lingers soft as a whisper: how will we choose to remember? With fear or with wisdom? With cruelty or with compassion? Rome leaves the answer to us. As we linger in the long night of history, the story of Rome's punishments begins to fade like the embers of a fire. The crosses are no longer standing, the collars no longer press into flesh, the beasts no longer roar. What remains is the echo, a reminder that civilization and cruelty often walk side by side, and that power is never free from the temptation of fear. The lesson is not to recoil from Rome in horror, but to understand it with quiet honesty. Rome was brilliant and Rome was brutal. Its aqueducts still stand, its roads still stretch, its law still shapes ours. But its punishments too left their mark, reminding us that the shadow of cruelty is as enduring as the stones of its amphitheaters. To study Rome is to study ourselves, our fascination with justice, our fear of disorder, our temptation to wield pain as power. And so the story slows. The voices of senators fade, the cheers of crowds grow faint, the clang of iron and the crack of whips dissolve into silence. The condemned are at peace. The emperors are long gone. The arenas are dust. What remains is the hush of memory, gentle and continuously. As you drift with it, imagine the ancient city not in its moments of cruelty, but in its quiet nights. Torches burn, low streets fall silent, and the Tiber flows softly through the dark. The empire sleeps, and with it the long story of its punishments closes like a book placed gently on a shelf. And in that silence one question lingers soft as a whisper. How will we choose to remember, with fear or with wisdom, with cruelty or with compassion? Rome leaves the answer to us. Perhaps that is why the ruins still stand, not to glorify the blood spilled within their stones, but to remind us of what endures when cruelty fails. The Colosseum's walls are broken, yet its arches still hold the sky. The memory of crosses still haunts the roads, yet flowers grow where bodies once hung. The Tarpeian Rock is silent, yet the wind that brushes its cliff carries no screams, only the hum of the city below. Nature and time have softened the sharpness of Rome's cruelty, turning punishment into lesson, fear into reflection. And so as the night deepens and history's voices grow still, let yourself rest with the thought that even the harshest empires pass, and even the loudest cruelties fade into quiet. What remains is the gentle reminder that compassion outlasts fear, that memory outlasts pain, and that sleep itself is the kindest of judges. Rome sleeps now, and in its slumber it invites you to do the same. After centuries of triumph and terror, Rome finally fell silent. The Western Empire, once the master of the known world, fractured under the weight of invasions, civil wars, and decay. Its legions no longer patrolled distant frontiers. Its senators no longer debated beneath marble columns, and its arenas no longer echoed with the cries of the condemned. A civilization that had bound itself together with punishment and fear now dissolved into silence. For those who lived through the empire's twilight, the fall must have felt like waking from a long, brutal dream. The punishments that once defined order lost their context. Crucifixions became less common, the great spectacles of the Colosseum ended, and the Tarpeian Rock ceased to claim victims. Without the empire's architecture of fear, punishment reverted to smaller, more local forms. Kings, tribes, and bishops invented their own systems, borrowing from Rome but never equaling its scale. The silence was not immediate. Echoes of cruelty lingered, carried into medieval times through memory and imitation. Yet the collapse of Roman authority created space for new meanings. The cross, once Rome's cruelest invention, transformed into a symbol of faith. The martyrs, once victims of spectacle, became saints. The empire that had sought to control memory now became a memory itself, sometimes cursed, sometimes revered, always remembered. To walk among the ruins after the fall must have been eerie. Weeds crept into amphitheaters, markets emptied, statues crumbled. The grandeur of Rome faded into whispers, and with it the punishments that once terrified millions became shadows in stone, reminders that no power, however mighty, can escape silence in the end. With Rome's fall, the meaning of punishment changed. Medieval kings and churchmen inherited Roman methods but dressed them in new clothes. Where Rome crucified rebels, the Middle Ages burned heretics. Where Rome erased names from inscriptions, bishops excommunicated sinners, striking their names from sacred rolls. The continuity was clear, but the purpose shifted. Cruelty was no longer staged as imperial theatre. It was justified as divine necessity. And yet Rome's shadow was always present. The arenas, though empty, inspired new sites of punishment, market squares, gallows, scaffolds. Crowds still gathered, still watched, still whispered. The lesson Rome had taught, that fear binds societies together, was not forgotten. But now punishment carried a different voice. It claimed to save souls, even as it broke bodies. At the same time, compassion began to grow. Monks and philosophers wrote of mercy, of forgiveness, of the duty to temper justice with kindness. These ideas, though small at first, planted seeds that would one day bloom into new concepts of law and human dignity. Rome had wielded punishment as power. The world that followed began to dream of punishment as correction, even redemption. The transformation was slow, uneven, and often cruel in its own right. But through it, the memory of Rome remained a guiding star, sometimes followed, sometimes avoided. To burn a man alive in a medieval square was to echo the burning tunic of Rome. To erase a name from history was to repeat damnatio memoriae. And yet every act of mercy, every voice for compassion, was also a whisper against Rome's shadow, a step toward breaking the chain of cruelty. With Rome's fall, the meaning of punishment changed. Medieval kings and churchmen inherited Roman methods but dressed them in new clothes. Where Rome crucified rebels, the Middle Ages burned heretics. Where Rome erased names from inscriptions, bishops excommunicated sinners, striking their names from sacred rolls. The continuity was clear, but the purpose shifted. Cruelty was no longer staged as imperial theatre, it was justified as divine necessity. And yet Rome's shadow was always present. The arenas, though empty, inspired new sites of punishment, market squares, gallows, scaffolds. Crowds still gathered, still watched, still whispered. The lesson Rome had taught, that fear binds societies together, was not forgotten. But now punishment carried a different voice. It claimed to save souls, even as it broke bodies. In medieval Europe, punishment often took on a moral or religious frame. Trials of heresy, witch hunts, and inquisitions echoed Rome's public punishments, but were infused with theology. The condemned were told that their pain could purify their ashes, serving as warnings to others. Unlike Rome, which saw suffering as spectacle, medieval rulers cloaked cruelty in the language of salvation. Yet the outcome was often the same: broken bodies, silenced voices, fear woven into the fabric of society. At the same time, compassion began to grow. Monks and philosophers wrote of mercy, of forgiveness, of the duty to temper justice with kindness. These ideas, though small at first, planted seeds that would one day bloom into new concepts of law and human dignity. Rome had wielded punishment as a power. The world that followed began to dream of punishment as correction, even redemption. The transformation was slow, uneven, and often cruel in its own right. But through it, the memory of Rome remained a guiding star, sometimes followed, sometimes avoided. To burn a man alive in a medieval square was to echo the burning tunic of Rome. To erase a name from history was to repeat damnatio memoriae. And yet every act of mercy, every voice for compassion, was also a whisper against Rome's shadow, a step toward breaking the chain of cruelty. Tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the world long after Rome. The Colosseum is empty, the roads are quiet, and the empire lies buried beneath centuries of dust. Yet the whisper of its punishments still lingers. It is not a shout anymore, not the roar of lions or the clash of iron, but a faint murmur in memory. That whisper asks us to remember both the brilliance and the brutality of Rome. It reminds us that law and cruelty, civilization and fear can walk together in the same marble streets. It reminds us that even the greatest empires cannot escape the silence of time. And it reminds us that memory once forged in suffering can be reshaped into wisdom. So let the whisper carry you gently. Let the ruins fade into shadow, the names into dust, the cries into silence. Rome is gone, and with it the punishments that once shook the world. What remains is story softened by time, ready to cradle you in sleep. And as you close your eyes, think of the Tiber flowing endlessly to the sea of torches, flickering low in quiet streets of stars rising above silent ruins. The empire rests, the world is calm, and you too can rest, carried by the long silence after Rome. Perhaps you might imagine the voices of those long-past senators, whose debates no longer matter, gladiators, whose swords no longer clash slaves, whose chains have rusted away. Their stories drift like dust in the night air, present, but weightless, fading into dreams. The great punishments, once so vivid, now dissolve into a soft rhythm, like waves against a distant shore. And as sleep takes hold, know that you are far from the fear that bound Rome. You lie not in an arena of lions, but in the quiet of your own rest. The empire is gone. Its cruelty is only memory. What remains is peace, and in that peace, the gentle drift into dreams. Long after an empire falls, it does not vanish. It lingers in ruins, in laws, in the words of poets, and in the imaginations of those who come after. Rome, more than any empire before or since, lives on in this afterlife. Its punishments, once terrifying realities, have become shadows in memory, shaping the way humanity dreams of justice, cruelty, and power. In monasteries of medieval Europe, monks copied Roman texts by candlelight. They did not always approve of what they read, yet they preserved it nonetheless. Cicero's speeches, the laws of the 12 tables, and the writings of historians, like Tacitus and Livy, survived because they were transcribed in ink on parchment. Each time a monk bent over his desk to copy a line about Roman punishments or Roman justice, he carried the empire's memory into another century. Rome had sought to dominate through cruelty. Now its memory endured through fragile pages in quiet cloisters. Jurists of the Renaissance centuries later opened these manuscripts and saw in them the foundations of their own systems of law. They admired Rome's ability to codify rules, to regulate citizens, to control society through statutes. Yet even as they studied the brilliance of Roman law, the darker echoes remained exile, execution, branding, erasure. Renaissance judges borrowed Rome's language of justice, but often could not escape its shadow of cruelty. The afterlife of Rome was not one of pure glory. It was mixed, ambivalent, complicated. Artists, too, revived Rome in their work. Painters depicted Christian martyrs thrown to lions, using Roman amphitheaters as backdrops for drama and devotion. Sculptors carved busts in Roman style, their faces serene, yet behind those serene expressions lay centuries of terror. Even architecture carried Rome's memory forward. Every arch in Paris, every dome in Florence, every column in Washington was built in dialogue with Rome. To imitate its beauty was to acknowledge its power, and to acknowledge its power was to remember its punishments as well. Rome's afterlife extended even beyond Europe. Conquerors from Napoleon to Mussolini invoked Rome as a model of authority. Colonizers on distant continents used Roman roads and Roman laws as metaphors for their own projects of expansion. And yet, within these invocations always lurked Rome's darker inheritance. To admire Rome was also to confront its brutality. To dream of building another Rome was to flirt knowingly or not with its architecture of fear. Thus, the afterlife of Rome reveals a truth: no empire dies completely. Even in silence, Rome whispered through the ages, shaping Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. Its cruelty became a cautionary tale, but also an inheritance, one that both inspired and haunted the civilizations that followed. Philosophers and storytellers could not ignore Rome's legacy. Augustine, living in the crumbling empire of the 5th century, saw Rome's cruelty as proof of humanity's fallen state. For him, the sack of the city was not just political disaster, but spiritual lesson. No earthly empire, however grand, could escape corruption. Rome's punishments were to him evidence of pride, arrogance, and sin. Montaigne, centuries later writing in Renaissance France, meditated on cruelty as one of the deepest vices. He recalled the spectacles of Rome gladiators, executions, crucifixions, and saw in them humanity's darkest impulses. For Montaigne, Rome was both fascinating and horrifying, an example of what people will tolerate when power normalizes cruelty. His essays whispered a warning across the centuries: cruelty, once accepted, becomes invisible. Nietzsche, in the modern age, viewed Rome differently. To him, the empire's punishments expressed raw strength, an affirmation of vitality, even if brutal. He admired Rome's will to power, its unashamed embrace of dominance. Yet even Nietzsche, who resisted moral condemnation, could not escape fascination with the spectacle of Roman cruelty. In his philosophy, the memory of Rome became a mirror of human ambition, strength, and the dangers of excess. Imagination, too, carried Rome's shadows. Poets wrote of martyrs who endured Roman torment. Novelists filled their pages with gladiators and emperors. Shakespeare set plays in Roman times, turning assassinations and suicides into timeless drama. Later filmmakers projected the Colosseum onto screens across the world, reviving the roar of lions and the cries of crowds for new audiences. Each retelling, whether reverent or critical, kept Rome alive. Even dreams carried these shadows. The image of lions in an arena of crosses by a road of names struck from marble, these became symbols not just of Rome, but of power itself. To imagine punishment even today is often to imagine Rome. Our collective imagination remains bound to its images. The cross, the arena, the brand they live in our minds as archetypes of cruelty and control. Perhaps that is Rome's strangest punishment. It condemned itself to eternal memory. By staging cruelty so grandly, it ensured it would never be forgotten. Empires seek immortality. Rome achieved it, though not always in the way it intended. It is remembered, yes, but remembered for its punishments as much as for its laws and roads. And in that memory, philosophy and imagination continue to wrestle with what Rome means, greatness or cruelty, or both. Now, as the story drifts toward its end, Rome itself begins to blur into dream. The sharp edges of whips, chains, and iron collars soften. The roar of beasts and the cries of crowds dissolve into a hum. What was once terror becomes a distant rhythm, like the sound of waves against stone. In this half-light, Rome is no longer a place of cruelty, but a landscape of memory. Columns rise like trees in a twilight forest. Broken amphitheaters curve like hollowed shells. The Tiber flows endlessly, carrying with it fragments of voices long gone. In dream, Rome is peaceful, not the empire of fear, but the empire of memory. As you rest, let the ruins cradle your thoughts. Imagine walking slowly through empty forums, hearing only your footsteps echo against marble. Imagine the Colosseum not filled with crowds, but with silence, the sand unmarked, the air still. Imagine the Tarpeian Rock at dusk, not with screams, but with the wind's soft song. Rome, once a place of punishment, becomes in dream a place of stillness. The dream drifts deeper. Statues broken by time seem whole again, but their faces are gentle now, their eyes calm. Roads once lined with crucifixions now stretch empty beneath the stars. Fires that once consumed men in burning tunics are now only hearth flames, warm and quiet. Even the wheel of breaking turns no more. It is still a relic resting in shadow. Perhaps you hear faint voices, senators debating soldiers, marching children laughing in a forum. They mingle, blur and fade until all that remains is silence. That silence is not cruel. It is restful. It says the empire is over, the punishments are ended, the memory is safe. And as the night deepens, let Rome drift further from history into shadow, from shadow into dream. The empire sleeps, and in its sleep it invites you to do the same. Its punishments are over, its echoes are soft, its lesson is complete. The rest is silence, and in that silence peace.